Can you share who these names are?
I mean, for now, I'd prefer to just describe who they are, and I mean, you can the two instances that I just named, both of them have had their names publicly described, so it's certainly not difficult to figure out who I'm talking about. But
Before we dive into this interview, it's important to understand the broader context. The case of Jeffrey Epstein, the financier convicted of sex crimes involving minors, remains one of the most controversial criminal scandals in modern American history. Allegations of powerful associates, controversial plea agreements, and questions about government transparency have kept the story in the headlines for years. In this interview, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz discusses her review of newly accessed Epstein-related files and raises concerns about redactions, accountability, and the pursuit of justice for survivors.
thanks for having me as always, Brittany.
I want to pick your brain on something that you did this week. You looked through the unredacted Epstein files. Walk us through that experience. What was it like?
I did. Unfortunately, the transparency law that we passed to require the unredacted version of the Epstein files to be public was violated by the Trump administration, because when the files were released and under that law, there were thousands and thousands of redactions. Now, had they just been redactions of the names of victims as the law required, then that would have been one thing. But it was very clear that there was far more than that. And so we have an opportunity at the Department of Justice to go and look at the unredacted version. And what I saw, Brittany, was incredibly disturbing. There were not only government lawyers who were involved in the negotiation of the sweetheart deal that Epstein got, whose names were redacted illegally, but also I saw the names of individuals like a billionaire hedge fund manager who was implicated in the likelihood that he knew about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, traveled to Jeffrey Epstein's island, was on his plane, and it clearly indicated that that he had that information. Why wasn't he interviewed? Why isn't the FBI investigating him? These are things that absolutely should occur so that the Epstein survivors can get a measure of justice. There was another name redacted that was of a private investigator who was accused of going into Jeffrey Epstein's home to remove items to hide his crimes, and his name was redacted. Why isn't he being investigated? Why hasn't he been brought before the Oversight Committee to testify about what he knew? So, I mean, that just scratches the surface, and it's all incredibly disturbing, unlawful, and I'm going to just continue to fight for the full transparency that the public and the survivors deserve.
Those types of names weren't supposed to be redacted. So the next question is obviously, why were they redacted, right? Has the DOJ said anything? Because there's millions and millions of documents, and I'm sure there's probably a mistake or two on redactions, but you think that this is a cover-up, right?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, there's just too many names for it not to be a cover-up. I mean, when I was looking through the files, there were government lawyers who were discussing their concern over the possibility that Ghislaine Maxwell was going to get a pardon in 2020. I mean, and these were lawyers that were concerned and seemed in the correspondence not to want to get her, to have her get a pardon. There was another series of names that were redacted that shouldn't have been, where they were discussing something that was unethical and suggested that the email should be deleted. And those names were redacted. It's certainly possible that, and even likely, that some of the names were accidentally redacted, but there are thousands of redactions. And I mean, just by example, the number of times that government lawyers involved in the negotiation over the sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein got whose names were redacted none of them should be redacted ever, and they were redacted countless times.
What's the DOJ's excuse for why there were all these redactions then? What have they said to you?
They haven't really said much of anything. It's not clear. It shouldn't even be that we have to go down as members of Congress to the Department of Justice, sit in front of only 4 computers for limited periods of time to be able to review the files. The names should all be redacted. They shouldn't be hidden, and the names should all be uncovered. They shouldn't be hidden, and they're only being hidden to protect guilty people who absolutely should be investigated, who should potentially be prosecuted, and should certainly some of them be brought in front of the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee. Now, what I've done, because we have to continue the fight here for full.
At this point, it's worth pausing to unpack what's being claimed. The 2008 plea deal given to Jeffrey Epstein, often referred to as a sweetheart deal, has long been criticized by legal experts and victims advocates. It allowed Epstein to avoid more serious federal charges and included broad immunity for potential co-conspirators. Critics argue that the agreement limited accountability and shielded others who may have been involved. However, determining whether redactions in newly released documents represent routine legal protection, bureaucratic error, or something more deliberate is a complex question. Transparency advocates say the public deserves answers, but legal processes around ongoing investigations and privacy protections can also complicate what is released. So the key question for viewers is this: where should the balance lie between transparency and legal caution when sensitive criminal cases involve powerful figures?
Transparency and also for accountability, is I've introduced legislation called the No Escaping Justice Act. That legislation would make sure that foreign perpetrators that committed the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein helped propagate would lose their visa privileges to enter the United States, and their assets would be frozen in the United States banks as well. Because there's no way that we should be allowing people who have committed these kinds of heinous crimes into the United States, and they certainly shouldn't have access to their assets and should be under full investigation and held accountable.
If these names are illegally redacted, if you're saying this is a cover-up for the rich and the powerful, can you share who these names are?
For now, I'd prefer to just describe who they are, and you can the two instances that I just named, both of them have had their names publicly described. So it's certainly not difficult to figure out who I'm talking about. But for now, I'll just describe them, and I'm going to continue to pursue reviewing the files so I can get to the bottom of more individuals who definitely, or at least allegedly, seem to have been directly involved in either helping Jeffrey Epstein commit his crimes or were very aware of them and did nothing, and make sure that we can help get some justice brought to bear for these victims.
I keep coming back to this point, but I'm really curious how these names got redacted. Who gave the order to redact them?
The trail leads right to Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi has the absolute ability and the requirement under the law to have released all of the files with only the names of victims redacted and no one else. And there are thousands of hidden names, and it's clear to me that they are hiding those names in almost all cases to protect guilty people, to put obstacles in the path of the possibility of having these people who committed heinous crimes against minors or were aware of and look the other way of heinous crimes committed against minors and allow them to get away with it.
If someone's illegally redacting names from these files, what kind of trouble can they get into? Could they receive jail time over that? What does that punishment look like?
I'm not entirely sure what the penalties are in the law, but I will tell you that because included in the redactions alongside that, you have several very serious files that have deeply serious accusations from a 13-year-old against Donald Trump himself. And until today, those files weren't even available and weren't released in the file release that was required by the law. So that they have been now, and it's going to be incredibly important to try to follow up with the obviously now no longer a minor individual, to get to the bottom of credibility and the possibility that Donald Trump committed the crime that she accused him of.
I hear you when you say you want to just describe who these people are, not name their names, but are they household names? Would people know who these people are?
They are people who have been named in the news in the past. Again, one is a hedge fund billionaire and who flew on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, who spent time with him on his island, and the other is a private investigator who was accused of removing documents and items from Jeffrey Epstein's home, ostensibly, at least allegedly, to help him hide his crimes.
You and I have talked before about that 2008 sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein got. And just to remind our viewers, Alex Acosta, at the time, he was serving as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. He cut a deal with Jeffrey Epstein that allowed him to dodge serious federal charges. The deal also granted him federal immunity, along with 4 other women who were named as accomplices. And arguably, one of the most controversial parts of this deal, it also granted federal immunity to any potential co-conspirators. What did you find out about this deal when reviewing the unredacted files?
Well, Alex Acosta's name himself was redacted in those files. I saw numerous instances in which he and his U.S. attorneys that worked on the case, their names were redacted. There were co-conspirators that were named in the sweetheart deal whose names were also redacted, so not victims, but co-conspirators. And there was a lot of chatter and discussion and emails back and forth. If the purpose of the law that required the release of all the files with only the names of victims redacted was so that we could have full transparency and get to the bottom of what happened and examine this sweetheart deal. And I have legislation, as you know, and we've talked about it, the Courtney Wild legislation, that would make sure that the Crime Victims' Rights Act fully applies in cases where you would prohibit sweetheart deals from preventing victims, prohibit sweetheart deals and ensure that victims have the ability to go to court and know about the proposed plea deal and be able to object to it like crime victims are able to under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. That was not afforded to these victims. They never knew that this sweetheart deal was cut and that he was going to get a slap on the wrist. And they've been fighting ever since, and I continue to fight alongside them to make sure that that kind of justice can happen.
You told me the last time that we spoke that the DOJ was making this process really restrictive. It was very clunky. You only had 4 or so computers to look at these files on. Was that the case?
Yes, you have to go all the way down to a Department of Justice building, up several floors to a small room. You're escorted by staff. There are only 4 computer terminals. So only 4 members can review those files at a time. You have to make an appointment. There's limited period of time that you're able to be at the computer. The system itself has a lot of keystrokes that you have to go through to be able to unredact the name. And it actually kicks. It didn't happen to me, but several colleagues of mine who were there got kicked out of the system or having computer glitchy problems. So it's a preposterous, outrageous process that they've established that the law doesn't allow. The files should just be available, searchable. There is a searchable database, but there is so much darkened, including the content of emails that shouldn't be darkened either. There were instances where I was searching for specific documents and found emails when not only the names that should not have been redacted were darkened, but I could not unredact the names or the content of the email that I was looking for, that I was trying to read. And I asked why, and they said they would, take it back, take the document number back and try to get me the information. Hopefully they'll follow up, but I had other colleagues tell me that had happened to them as they've been searching, and the DOJ never gets back to them.
The word in this conversation that's come up a few times is cover up. That came up in our last conversation as well. You're saying this runs up all the way to Attorney General Pam Bondi. What question would you ask her if she was sitting across from you right now?
Well, she's going to be sitting across from my colleagues on the Oversight Committee, where a bipartisan vote to subpoena her was adopted by the committee, rightfully so. The questions that I would ask her include, I want to know the details of how this sweetheart deal was decided upon. The names should be unredacted as to who was responsible for them, the timeline, and how it is that sweetheart deal that resulted in a slap on the wrist for Jeffrey Epstein was allowed. There was some very concerning exchanges that I saw with redacted names that I was able to unredact that had individuals involved in the discussions really cruelly speaking about the victims. So this whole thing was a rotting pile of sewer trash, and Pam Bondi, who is now the head of the DOJ, needs to answer for why she is violating the law and has been obfuscating the ability to be able to get to the bottom of questions like that.
Like you and I talk about every time, at the heart of this is a sex trafficking network that really expands around the globe. What you're saying is really concerning stuff. I mean, what was the most concerning thing to you that you saw in this in these unredacted files?
The most concerning thing was the clear effort to hide who was responsible for some of the most serious parts of the cover-up. Like the document that I saw that had the private investigator's name, who seems to have been trying to assist with the cover-up so that Jeffrey Epstein wouldn't be able to be held accountable. This is all alleged, but that's the problem, is that they've hidden this for so long and prevented the information from getting out. And now Pam Bondi, it's another question that I'm sure will be asked of her, is why have you been hiding all of this and covering up for Jeffrey Epstein and his crimes, and for people who covered up his crimes and allowed him to get away for so many years with sexual abuse and trafficking of young women? And there's over 1,000 women who deserve justice. And I mean, shame on Pam Bondi as a woman leader and the highest ranking law enforcement officer in the country for not being a champion of these survivors instead of continuing to victimize them.
Some people we've seen around the globe have faced consequences over their ties to Epstein. Some have not. Do you think that we're any closer to revealing really the extent of Epstein's criminal network?
Well, I mean, there's millions of files, and there are many individuals going through them. It has begun to be revealed the extent of some people who are foreign citizens and their involvement, and it's appalling to me that there are leaders in other countries who are holding their individuals who have been discovered to have really wildly inappropriate relationships with Jeffrey Epstein, even after he served in prison. He really served jail time in the evenings and was allowed under the sweetheart deal to go to work every day. That they continued their relationships with him, but that the Justice Department under Pam Bondi and Donald Trump are refusing and have shut everything down, or saying no one else is going to be investigated. That's revolting. The message that sends not only to the survivors, but to other criminal elements who are engaged. And human and sexual trafficking, Brittany, is a really huge scourge that is very widespread in the United States and around the world. And allowing it to continue and not making a very significant example of the perpetrators of these crimes is an outrage, and it allows millions of other young women and young men, frankly, to be victims again, to be victims in the future. Because this sends a strong message. The government of the United States of America, to the highest office in the land, the President of the United States, has no regard for the fact that over 1,000 young women were victimized and sexually assaulted through a network run by Jeffrey Epstein, a close friend of the President of the United States. And there is a way to open these investigations and allow for accountability, but they're refusing because it's obvious that they are trying to cover up where this might actually lead.
I do now want to totally switch gears and just pick your brain a little bit on some breaking news from yesterday, and that is that Kristi Noem was officially fired from her position as DHS secretary. She's out after a controversial tenure. What do you make of that firing?
Well, it's about time. Long overdue. She never should have become the Secretary of Homeland Security in the first place. She was wholly unqualified for the job. That is one of the largest agencies in the federal government. She abused her power. She was responsible for revoking the temporary protective status of Venezuelans, Haitians, the protective status of folks from Ukraine who are here. This is someone who spent $600,000 building a immigration detention center in the middle of the Everglades, a heinous place that abusive practices have been committed against undocumented immigrants. Someone who said, like Donald Trump, that they were going to go after the worst of the worst criminals, but presided over the murder, and then called them domestic terrorists of two people who were doing nothing more than exercising their First Amendment rights in Minnesota. She is part of a large part of the reason. She and Donald Trump are the reason that ICE is out of control and needs to be reined in. And it's good that she's gone. Unfortunately, her successor is likely to just continue Donald Trump's really heinous abusive practices. I hope for progress, but I am not optimistic.
Her successor is Senator Markwayne Mullin. He served in Congress, so he was your colleague at a time. You're not too confident, is what you sounded like. Why not? Talk to us about that pick.
Well, I have a good relationship with Markwayne Mullin, but unfortunately, what I've seen so far during Donald Trump's second term is that he really has just fallen in lockstep with the president's agenda, and appears that he's, as a senator, been really willing to do his bidding. And I can't imagine Donald Trump would bring on anyone as the Secretary of DHS that wouldn't be willing to continue to just fall in line. I'm happy to be surprised, but from what I've seen out of Senator Mullin, he has pretty clearly walked in lockstep with Donald Trump and not pushed back on the heinous abusive practices of ICE. Look, all we have to do with ICE is follow the law and the Constitution. I mean, and maybe keep your word. Go after the worst of the worst. As I've told you, every interview we've done on this topic, I am absolutely supportive of deporting criminals. If you've committed a crime in the United States and you've abused the privilege of being here, or you're an undocumented immigrant and you were trying to find some kind of lawful pathway to be here, then bye-bye. But the DHS's own statistics show that only 14% of those that have been detained and deported had any kind of a criminal record. I mean, that has to change. It also has to be that ICE takes the mask off. You have the right to face your accuser in the United States, wears identification, engages in due process, seeks judicial warrants. You can't just expect that someone's going to barrel your door down in the United States. We have a prohibition against illegal search and seizure. That applies to everyone, not just citizens. And they need to compromise with and work with us as Democrats and Republicans to get DHS reopened and make sure that ICE is brought under control and under the law.
Congresswoman, I really appreciate the time today. I appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time.
The Epstein case continues to raise difficult questions about power, accountability, and transparency within major institutions. In this interview, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz alleges that critical names and details may still be hidden within government records, while also pointing to legislative efforts aimed at expanding accountability for those connected to Epstein's scheme. Whether these claims ultimately lead to new investigations, policy changes, or further disclosures remains to be seen. What's clear is that the pursuit of justice for victims and the public's demand for transparency continues to shape the conversation years after the scandal first emerged. What do you think? Should more documents be released publicly, or should investigators proceed cautiously to protect legal processes? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value balanced, fact-based analysis of major political stories, be sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more in-depth reporting and breakdowns.